I'm writing this because I was shocked by the way I learned about my wife's years-long infidelity behind my back. There are two parts to this story. The first is less shocking and tells how I learned of her infidelity the first time, and the second part is about how I learned the second time, and it's truly mind-blowing. It all started when I was living in South Korea and teaching English. I met my wife Korean there, and our relationship started off well. We had our arguments, but we loved each other, or at least I thought so. After several years of marriage, we decided to move to the United States. I was tired of teaching English as a profession, and she wanted to become a nurse in the United States. She had been an emergency room nurse in Korea. Her English was okay, but she wanted to try to learn it fluently. So, before we immigrated, she started learning English and went to a language academy, where she spent long hours. After she studied there for a while, before we moved back to the US, I started noticing some changes in her. First, in Korea, there's a messaging app called KakaoTalk. It's used almost everywhere. Think of it as Facebook Messenger for Korea. She always used to have our photo as her profile picture on the app. She made sure I had our photo too. Then one day I noticed she'd removed all our photos from the app, and I asked her about it. I forgot what excuse she gave, but when I asked her to give us back our photo, she flatly refused. I think she pretended it wasn't a big deal and that I was making too much of it. I knew something had changed and noticed that her attitude toward me had become more confrontational and demeaning during this time. However, I still didn't suspect any infidelity. I should have, but she always said she loved me very much and would never cheat on me. I think I believed her. There were several nights when she didn't come home. Each time, of course, she came up with a plausible excuse. The night I found out, she said she was staying over at her sister's because she had to drive her sister and her husband to the airport early in the morning. It was probably the third or fourth time I had to stay alone in the apartment, and that night, I was feeling lonely, so I messaged her on KakaoTalk. Not only did she not respond to my Kakao messages, but I realized she hadn't even read them because you can tell on the app whether a message has been seen or not. Later, I found out she had blocked me, so she didn't even receive the message. I called, but there was no answer. I waited a little longer and called again. Of course, no answer again. You can also see who's currently logged in on KakaoTalk. I saw that her sister, with whom she said she was staying, was logged in. I called her sister and asked if she was there, and explained that she had told me she would be staying there today. Her sister seemed shocked, and from her tone and response, it was clear she knew nothing about it. She hadn't seen my wife and didn't know where she was. I didn't know it then, but after my phone call with my sister called my wife and wanted to know what was going on. My wife probably lied to her, just like she did to me, but her sister convinced her that she needed to call me. So my wife calls me, and I was furious because I knew she'd lied to me. I told her she better come home now or our marriage would be over. When she got home, she told me to get in her car and started telling me a story which she'd probably told her sister too about something she didn't want to tell me, but that she'd been hanging out at a club with a few single friends. She pretended she was just helping them meet guys and wasn't looking for anyone herself. I said, "Give me your phone," and essentially snatched it from her hands. I opened the KakaoTalk app, clicked on the first conversation, and started scrolling through it, taking pictures. Only then did the real truth emerge. The messages I photographed were from a teacher at the language academy she attended. I only had a few photos before she took the phone back, crying and begging me to stop because she didn't want to hurt me anymore. But the photos I did have definitely told a story. They were having a sexual relationship, and she was with him that night. So, she admitted she liked him and had an affair with him. I was completely devastated. We were literally supposed to go to the US together in a month. Her green card had already been approved, and I really had no one there to support me. You see, teaching English in Korea is usually temporary. Academies give native English speakers year-long contracts, and most people return to their home countries after a year or two. By then, I'd been married for 3 years, and hardly ever went out. Most of my friends had long since left. She begged me to forgive her and said she was sorry, and it would never happen again. You know what to do. At first, I said, "No way, I'll leave alone." But I was completely heartbroken. It was like my whole world had collapsed. After a while, I just couldn't bear the thought of that 18-hour plane ride alone. I was a complete mess. So I decided to give her a second chance. We stayed together and returned to the United States. Part 2. The first year after returning was quite difficult. Finding a job outside of teaching with the resume limited to teaching time in Korea was difficult. Ultimately, I survived mainly by doing deliveries and part-time jobs. Then, due to financial difficulties, we were forced to move in with my parents. There, I found a job at a very good company, where I worked for a year before leaving for Korea. If I'd been smart, we would have stayed with my parents for a while from the start and gotten jobs there. In any case, after working there for a year, my wife also got a job there. Now, both earning a good income, we moved into our own apartment. Everything seemed to be going well. However, we still had the occasional argument, and sometimes it felt like she was deliberately pushing me away. Some of the things she got mad about left me scratching my head and thinking, why the hell is she complaining about this? I remember one time, I always left my Monster Energy cans by the sink so I could pour them out the next time I did the dishes. I usually never finished them all and just left them by the sink. She had never, as far as I can remember, said anything about not wanting me to do that before. But one day, she just got mad and said in an angry tone something like, "Why are you leaving them there? I told you not to. Pour them out in the sink right now. Or next time I'll pour them all on your pillow." When she was angry, she would belittle me and say all sorts of nasty things. She later apologized, but due to our constant fighting and growing distance, we decided to divorce around the fall of 2024. She'd been going to Korea for a few weeks to visit her family and friends almost every year since we moved to the US. That year, 2024, she was planning to return in the winter. At that point, the divorce proceedings were still ongoing. We were still living together because neither of us had the money to break the lease and move out. And we were living as friends, even friends with benefits. I still loved her, after all. While she was in Korea, she called me one day, crying, and said she'd received an angry KakaoTalk call from the wife of the man she'd cheated on me with for years earlier. My wife claimed she'd confessed everything to the woman. Later, she said the woman had sent her a legal notice threatening to sue her. So there you have it. While adultery isn't a criminal offense in South Korea, apparently it's still a civil wrong, and you have the right to sue the person your spouse cheated on you with for compensation. This seems very strange to an American, but it's true. You can do this in South Korea. I was stunned. She had to tell me because she was now afraid of legal repercussions and needed money to pay a lawyer to defend her. She asked for my help in taking out a $401,000 loan from work to pay for it. I asked her how his wife could have found out about something that happened all those years ago. She explained that they'd communicated about their affair through essays she'd written while attending a language academy, and that she must have read them. So I thought maybe he'd recently cheated again in a similar way with another student, and she'd found out. Then she started digging through his files and found those essays. I was really dubious about the timing of it all. It seemed very odd that she would suddenly contact my wife while my wife was in Korea. I mean, what are the chances? She could have found out about his infidelity anytime in the last 4 years. But she found out while my wife was in Korea. That really seemed like an odd timing. It seemed more likely that perhaps something had happened between my wife and him while she was there, and my wife found out. I mentioned this to my wife, but my wife insisted that there had been no meetings or communication with him since the initial infidelity, before we came to the US. So, foolishly believing her, I could only think that he must have cheated again. And then she dug through his files and found out about my wife and him all those years ago. Since she was already there, she used her credit card to hire a lawyer. She made me sign over the rights to sue the guy she cheated on me with on my behalf. Since we were still legally married in Korea, I'd sue him. I didn't really want to get involved, but all I had to do was agree to let her sue, and then she would take care of it. A couple of months passed, and then, of course, the guy she cheated on me with found out I was suing him. So, I don't know how, but he somehow got my email address and contacted me. What he told me left me in complete shock. He apologized, of course, and was very sincere. He told me they met when she returned to Korea at the end of 2024. She contacted him the day after she arrived in Korea and wanted to meet. At the time, he was trying to have a second child with his wife and didn't really want to meet her, but he was worried that if he ignored her, she might escalate the situation further and even involve his wife. They had lunch together, and she wanted to have sex with him, but he pretended to ignore her and dropped her off at the subway station. A few days later, she texted him that she still had deep feelings for him and asked if he felt the same. She wanted to meet and have sex. Trying to finally clear things up, he told her point blank that he had no feelings for her and didn't want to see her anymore. That's when my wife apparently went berserk. My wife must have gotten his wife's phone number from his car, or maybe looked her up by name on Kakao. It turns out, my wife was the one who contacted his wife and confessed. I know because I asked the man for proof. He sent me photos of the messages my wife had sent to his wife on Kakao. So it turns out this man's wife would never have found out if my wife hadn't contacted her. After his first email, before he even answered my subsequent questions, it dawned on me. What he was saying was far more plausible than what my wife had told me. Something had indeed happened between them the last time she visited Korea. The confession my wife made to his wife is legendary. Feeling betrayed by him, she explained everything to her. It details how they continued to communicate via Instagram, Snapchat, Google Docs, etc. All these years. They met in 2023 when my wife was traveling to Korea, and my wife even booked the hotel. From her confession, it's abundantly clear that she was deeply in love with this man. She even received online tutoring or sex talk lessons from him until around the summer of 2024. All this time, she maintained that there had been absolutely no contact between him and her since the initial affair. In 2020, now, armed with evidence and still in shock, I knew I had to confront my wife and give her one last chance to confess. So I told her something was bothering me. I explained that the timeline of how his wife found out about their affair 4 years ago, while my wife was in Korea, simply didn't make sense to me. I told her it seemed far more likely that something happened between him and her while she was in Korea, and his wife found out. She still denied anything had happened and still stuck to her story that they had never met or communicated since we moved to the US. Well, now I had proof. So I told her straight out that I knew she was lying and showed her the evidence. Only then did she confess. I know, it's always interesting to know how people find out their spouse is cheating on them, but it just blows my mind how it all happened. If my wife had never contacted his wife in a fit of rage and confessed, and if this were some other country that doesn't allow you to sue the person your spouse cheated on you with, I never would have found out. Only because of this lawsuit would he ever have contacted me and told me the truth. I know I wasn't the best husband, and communication was always a challenge because of the language barrier. I think they must have really bonded while she was at the language academy. He probably connected with her emotionally in a way I never could. He spoke her language, listened to her, comforted her. That's why she developed a deep connection with him. That's why it hurt so much when he pushed her away in the end. This is my story, and I hope it helps someone.